January 26, 1945. The Bois de Riedvire, northeastern France. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy pressed his body against the frozen earth, his field telephone cord trailing back through the snow like a lifeline to sanity. At 19 years old, he commanded what remained of Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. Around him, the snow-covered fields of Alsace stretched toward the fortified village of Holzwihr, where German forces had gathered for a counterattack that would test everything Murphy had learned in 2 years of continuous combat. Through the morning haze, Murphy counted 6 massive shapes emerging from the tree line, Tiger tanks. Each one weighed 54 tons and mounted an 88mm cannon capable of destroying any Allied armour at range. Behind them came approximately 250 German infantrymen, clad in white winter camouflage, moving with the disciplined confidence of veterans who had survived the Eastern Front. The mathematics of the situation were brutal. Murphy's company, which should have numbered 120 men, had been reduced to 40 soldiers after 3 days of savage fighting to capture these woods. Most were wounded, all were exhausted, and reinforcements that had been promised were not coming. Murphy lifted the telephone receiver to his ear. The voice on the other end delivered orders that offered no comfort but demanded everything. Hold your position. The road that ran through Murphy's position was not just another frozen track through the French countryside. It was the artery through which German forces hoped to drive deep into American lines, potentially collapsing the entire 3rd Division's advance and reversing weeks of costly progress. If those tanks broke through, hundreds of American soldiers positioned in the woods behind Murphy would be cut off and destroyed. What none of the German commanders knew as they launched their assault was that the undersized lieutenant standing between them and victory possessed something that transcended physical size or conventional military doctrine. Born into crushing poverty in Hunt County, Texas, Murphy had spent his entire life learning how to survive against impossible odds. He had fed his family by hunting with a rifle when most boys were still playing with toys. He had taken responsibility for his younger siblings when his father abandoned them and his mother died. He had lied about his age to enlist in an army that initially rejected him as too small and too young for combat. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Every hardship Murphy had endured, every lesson learned through deprivation and loss, had prepared him for this frozen field in France. And in the next hour, he would demonstrate that courage has nothing to do with size, that leadership cannot be measured in pounds or inches, and that one determined man in the right place at the right time can alter the course of history. The story of how a dirt-poor sharecropper's son became the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II begins not on a battlefield, but in a collapsing shack in rural Texas during the worst economic catastrophe America had ever known. Audie Murphy entered the world on June 20, 1925, in Kingston, a tiny farming community in Hunt County, Texas. He was the 7th of 12 children born to Emmett Berry Murphy and Josie Bell, Killian Murphy, Irish-American sharecroppers who worked land they would never own. The house where Audie spent his early years had dirt floors, no indoor plumbing, and walls that leaked rain. His family moved frequently between farms near Farmersville, Greenville, and Celeste, always one failed harvest away from complete destitution. The Great Depression, which devastated middle-class families across America, simply made harder a life that had never been easy for the Murphys. Emmett Murphy, Audie's father, drifted in and out of the family's existence with increasing frequency. He continued fathering children despite having no plan for feeding them. The responsibility for keeping the family alive fell largely to Josie Murphy and her older children, particularly young Audie, who possessed a natural talent that would prove essential to the family's survival. At an age when most children were learning to read, Audie was learning to shoot. His older sister provided him with a worn rifle, and the boy discovered he had an uncanny gift for marksmanship. He could judge distance instinctively, account for wind without conscious thought, and remained utterly calm in the moment before pulling the trigger. These were not skills taught in classrooms. They came from somewhere deeper, a combination of natural ability and desperate necessity. Audie hunted rabbits, squirrels, and other small game in the scrubland around the family's various homes. Every shot had to count because ammunition cost money the family did not have. He learned to move silently through brush, to read animal behavior, to wait with infinite patience for the perfect moment. The meat he brought home often meant the difference between his younger siblings eating or going hungry. This was not sport or recreation. This was survival, and Audie Murphy became very good at surviving. School was a luxury the Murphy family could afford only sporadically. Audie attended elementary classes in Celeste, when there was no farm work that required his labour. He made it through 5th grade before circumstances forced him to drop out permanently. At an age when most American children were entering middle school, Murphy was working full days for $1, ploughing fields and picking cotton under the brutal Texas sun. He also found work at a combination general store, garage, and filling station in Greenville, learning the value of hard work and honest dealing. Despite his limited formal education, Murphy was intelligent and observant. He learned by watching others, by asking questions, by figuring things out through trial and error. The rural poverty of his upbringing had taught him lessons that no classroom could provide. He understood hardship. He knew hunger. He had experience with responsibility far beyond his years, and he possessed an inner toughness forged by circumstances that would have broken many adults. In 1936, when Audie was 11 years old, Emmett Murphy abandoned the family permanently. He simply left one day and never returned, walking away from a wife and children who needed him desperately. The departure surprised no one. Emmett had been absent more than present for years, but his final abandonment left Josie Murphy alone to care for her large family with no support and few options. Josie Murphy struggled valiantly to hold her family together. She took whatever work she could find. Her older children, including Audie, contributed every penny they earned. But grinding poverty and constant stress took a terrible toll on her health. On May 23, 1941, Josie Bell Murphy died. Audie was 16 years old. His mother's death shattered what remained of the Murphy family structure. 3 of Audie's youngest siblings, Nadine, Billy, and Joe, were placed in an orphanage because no one in the extended family had resources to care for them. The older children scattered, each trying to survive on their own. For Audie Murphy, his mother's death represented a profound loss and a bitter failure. He had worked himself to exhaustion trying to help support the family, but it had not been enough. He had been unable to prevent his mother's death or keep his siblings together. The guilt and grief of these failures would haunt him for the rest of his life. But from this lowest point came a determination that would shape his future. Audie Murphy made himself a promise. He would reclaim his younger siblings from the orphanage. He would provide for them. He would ensure they had the opportunities he had never received. And to accomplish these goals, he needed to escape the trap of rural poverty that had destroyed his parents' lives. 6 months after his mother's death, on December 7, 1941, Japanese naval forces attacked the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The surprise assault killed more than 2,000 Americans and brought the United States into World War II. Across the nation, young men rushed to recruiting stations, eager to serve their country in its hour of need. In Greenville, Texas, 16-year-old Audie Murphy saw opportunity in the national crisis. Military service offered steady pay, 3 meals a day, and the chance to send money home to support his siblings. It represented everything his civilian life could not provide. Murphy walked into the nearest recruiting station and attempted to enlist. He was rejected. The Marine Corps turned him away immediately. At 5 feet 5.5 inches tall and weighing barely 112 pounds, Murphy fell below the minimum physical standards. He looked like a child, not a warrior. The Marine recruiter suggested he come back when he had grown. Murphy tried the Army Paratroopers next, attracted by the higher pay that airborne soldiers received. Again, he was rejected for being undersized and underweight. The Navy also declined him. Murphy's diminutive stature and youthful appearance worked against him everywhere he went. But Murphy was persistent. On June 30th, 1942, 10 days after his 17th birthday, he returned to the Army recruiting station in Greenville. His older sister, Corinne Burns, had signed an affidavit falsely stating that Audie was 18 years old, old enough to enlist without parental consent. The army, desperately needing men to fill the rapidly expanding wartime force, was less particular about physical size for infantry recruits than the other services. On that summer day in 1942, Private Audie Murphy entered the United States Army. Murphy was sent to Camp Walters, Texas, located southwest of Fort Worth and less than 100 miles from Hunt County, for 13 weeks of basic training. The training was physically demanding, designed to transform civilians into soldiers capable of surviving combat. For most recruits, basic training represented the hardest physical challenge they had ever faced. For Murphy, who had spent years doing manual farm labor in Texas heat, the training was difficult but manageable. What set Murphy apart was not physical prowess, but something his training sergeants noticed immediately. The young private remained calm under pressure. When other recruits panicked during exercises, Murphy stayed focused. When others made mistakes due to stress, Murphy executed his tasks with methodical precision. He absorbed instruction quickly and retained what he learned. His marksmanship, honed by years of hunting for survival, was exceptional. Murphy's commanders recognized his potential but worried about his size. Several suggested he should train for a support role, perhaps as a cook or clerk, rather than as a combat infantryman. Murphy refused. He had not joined the army to peel potatoes or file paperwork. He had enlisted to fight, and he was determined to prove he could do so effectively. After completing basic training, Murphy was sent to Fort Meade, Maryland, for advanced infantry training. There he learned the tactics and techniques that would keep him alive in combat. Small unit leadership, fire and maneuver, how to read terrain, how to use cover effectively, how to kill enemy soldiers before they killed you. In November 1942, Murphy was assigned to Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, a unit that would become his military home for the next 2.5 years. The 3rd Infantry Division had a proud history dating back to World War I, and its soldiers wore a distinctive blue and white striped patch. Murphy would help add new glory to that tradition in the savage fighting to come. On October 23, 1942, Murphy and his division departed from Norfolk, Virginia, aboard transport ships bound for Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa. The crossing took 16 days. Most of the soldiers, packed into the holds of the troop transports, suffered from seasickness during the Atlantic crossing. Murphy, who had never seen an ocean before enlisting, adjusted quickly to the motion of the ship. On November 8, 1942, the 3rd Infantry Division landed at Fedala, Morocco, as part of the three-pronged Allied invasion of North Africa. The landing was opposed by Vichy French forces loyal to the collaborationist government. Murphy's first exposure to combat came not against Germans, but against Frenchmen who would later become allies after the Vichy regime collapsed. The North African campaign introduced Murphy to the realities of modern warfare. Temperatures soared to 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day and plummeted at night. Water was scarce. Disease, particularly dysentery, ravaged the ranks as thoroughly as enemy fire. Murphy discovered he possessed a crucial quality that separated soldiers who survived from those who did not. He remained calm under fire. While some men froze when bullets cracked past their heads, Murphy moved with deliberate purpose. He assessed situations quickly and acted on his assessments. He found cover instinctively. He fired his weapon with accuracy rather than spray and pray. His natural marksmanship, developed hunting rabbits in Texas, translated seamlessly to shooting enemy soldiers. The division pushed eastward across North Africa, fighting German and Italian forces in a campaign that would last until May 1943. Murphy earned his first combat decoration during this period, though the specific action is not well documented in available records. What is clear is that his superiors recognized he was an exceptional soldier. In July 1943, the 3rd Infantry Division participated in the invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky. Murphy waded ashore from landing craft and fought his way inland through ancient towns, where German defenders made every building a fortress. The fighting was house to house, room to room, intensely personal and brutal. Murphy killed German soldiers at close range. He watched friends die. He learned that combat was not glorious or noble, but simply a terrible necessity that had to be endured. His performance in Sicily earned him promotion to corporal. The promotion came with increased responsibility. Murphy now led a squad of soldiers, men who depended on his judgment to keep them alive. He took this responsibility seriously. He studied tactics constantly. He thought through problems before acting. He made decisions quickly, but not rashly. And increasingly, the men under his command recognized that following Murphy's lead improved their chances of survival. In September 1943, the 3rd Infantry Division landed at Salerno as part of the Allied invasion of mainland Italy. The Germans were waiting in prepared positions on the high ground overlooking the beaches. The battle for the beachhead raged for days, with German counterattacks nearly pushing the Allies back into the sea. Murphy fought continuously for 72 hours, manning positions, leading counterattacks, pulling wounded men to safety. The intensity of the fighting at Salerno was unlike anything he had previously experienced. This was not skirmishing or patrolling. This was sustained, large-scale combat where every hour brought new casualties and new crises. During the Salerno fighting, Murphy earned his first Silver Star for gallantry in action. The specific details of the action that earned this decoration are not fully recorded, but the citation noted his leadership and courage under fire. It was the first of many decorations Murphy would earn, but at the time, he paid little attention to medals. He was focused entirely on keeping himself and his men alive. The Italian campaign became a grinding advance up the peninsula. The Germans conducted a masterful fighting withdrawal, making the Allies pay in blood for every mile of territory. The Italian terrain favored defense. Mountains, rivers, and valleys channeled attacking forces into killing zones, where German artillery and machine guns exacted terrible tolls. In January 1944, the division participated in the amphibious landing at Anzio, an operation designed to outflank German defensive lines and accelerate the drive on Rome. Instead, Anzio became a 4-month siege, where Allied forces were penned on the beachhead by determined German counterattacks. Murphy earned his 2nd Silver Star on January 30, 1944, for leading an assault against German positions despite intense mortar fire. On March 6, 1944, Murphy was wounded for the first time when German shell fragments struck him during a bombardment. The wounds were relatively minor, but serious enough to earn him his first Purple Heart. Murphy refused evacuation, remaining with his unit. To be sent to a hospital meant leaving his men, and Murphy had developed fierce loyalty to the soldiers who depended on him. By summer 1944, Murphy had been in continuous combat for 18 months. He had been promoted to sergeant, a recognition of his combat leadership and tactical skill. He had been wounded twice more, earning additional Purple Hearts, and each time he had refused evacuation. The physical and psychological toll of sustained combat was evident. Murphy had lost weight from an already slight frame. His hands sometimes shook from accumulated stress. He suffered from recurring nightmares about the men he had killed and the friends he had watched die. But Murphy had also developed into one of the most effective combat leaders in the 3rd Infantry Division. His men trusted him completely, his superiors recognized his exceptional ability, and Murphy himself had discovered a grim truth about his own nature. He was very good at war. The violence that would haunt him for the rest of his life came naturally to him in combat. He could kill enemy soldiers without hesitation, make life and death decisions instantly, and function effectively in situations where other men broke down. In August 1944, the 3rd Infantry Division was withdrawn from Italy for another amphibious operation, this time into southern France. Operation Dragoon commenced on August 15, 1944, with landings near Saint-Tropez. The division pushed rapidly north through the Rhône Valley, liberating French towns and villages as they advanced. On August 15, 1944, Murphy performed an action that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, the 2nd highest decoration for valor in the American military. The specific circumstances involved Murphy grabbing a machine gun during a firefight and using it to devastating effect against German soldiers, killing 2 and wounding 1. 2 German soldiers emerged from a house approximately 100 yards away and attempted to surrender. Murphy's best friend, a soldier named Latty Tipton, responded to the surrender gesture and moved forward to take them prisoner. As Tipton approached, the Germans shot him dead. It was a violation of the laws of war, a treacherous killing that enraged Murphy beyond reason. What happened next would become part of Murphy legend but represented something darker about combat and human nature. Murphy, consumed by rage at his friend's murder, advanced alone on the house where the Germans had taken cover. He moved under direct fire, reached the building, and systematically killed every German soldier inside using rifle grenades, his rifle, and captured German weapons. The official records do not specify how many Germans died in that house, but Murphy's actions that day earned the Distinguished Service Cross and revealed the cold fury that could overtake him in combat. By late autumn 1944, Murphy had been promoted again. He was now a staff sergeant, one of the senior non-commissioned officers in Company B. He had earned 4 Silver Stars, the Distinguished Service Cross, 3 Purple Hearts, and numerous other decorations. He had been in combat for more than 2 years without significant break. He was 20 years old. Then something extraordinary happened that would change Murphy's life and set the stage for his greatest moment of valor. Major Lloyd Ramsey, Murphy's battalion commander, recognized that the young sergeant possessed qualities that transcended enlisted rank. Murphy demonstrated tactical judgment that many officers lacked. He could read a battlefield instinctively. He made sound decisions under pressure. He led men effectively, and despite his lack of formal education, he was intelligent and articulate. Ramsey recommended Murphy for a battlefield commission, an honor rarely bestowed on enlisted men. On September 11, 1944, Staff Sergeant Audie Murphy became Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy, earning his commission through demonstrated battlefield competence rather than officer candidate school. The promotion recognized what Murphy had become through 2 years of continuous combat. He was no longer the undersized teenager who had been rejected by multiple recruiting stations. He was a hardened combat veteran who had killed enemy soldiers in every major campaign from North Africa through France. He understood infantry tactics at a level that many academy-trained officers never achieved, and he possessed moral courage to match his physical bravery, a willingness to make hard decisions and accept their consequences. On the same day he received his commission, Murphy earned his 4th Silver Star for leading an assault over 300 yards of fire-swept ground. The citation described his actions as displaying grim ferocity, a phrase that captured something essential about Murphy's approach to combat. He fought with controlled violence, channeling rage and fear into focused aggression that destroyed enemy resistance. By late November 1944, the 3rd Infantry Division had reached Strasbourg, becoming the first Allied unit to reach the Rhine River. But German forces still held the Colmar Pocket, a 65-kilometre-long and 50-kilometre-deep salient west of the river, centred on the town of Colmar. The task of eliminating this pocket fell primarily to the French First Army, with American units attached to provide additional strength. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was one of the coldest in European memory. Temperatures in Alsace plummeted to -20 degrees Celsius, with snow accumulating to depths of 3 feet. The men of the 3rd Infantry Division, exhausted after more than 2 years of continuous combat, moved into positions in the frozen landscape in mid-December 1944. On January 20, 1945, French forces began the offensive to clear the Colmar Pocket. The 3rd Infantry Division's role was to attack southeast, cross the Ill River, bypass Colmar to the north, and open a path for French armoured divisions to reach the Rhine. The fighting was savage. German forces defending the pocket were determined and well-equipped. The frozen ground made digging foxholes nearly impossible. Artillery fire was devastatingly effective because shells bursting on frozen ground created larger fragmentation patterns than those exploding in soft earth. Casualties mounted steadily. On January 23, the 30th Regiment of the 3rd Infantry Division captured the Bois de Riedveer, a wooded area north of the village of Holtzwihr, and reached the outskirts of both Holtzwihr and the adjacent village of Riedveer. There they encountered 10 enemy tanks and tank destroyers, accompanied by at least 100 infantry. The result was disastrous. Without adequate cover and unable to dig foxholes in the frozen earth, the American unit was cut to pieces. Shattered, under strength, and badly disorganized, the 30th Regiment was forced to withdraw from the Bois de Riedvier, leaving behind numerous dead and wounded. The 15th Regiment received orders to retake the same ground the next day. The subsequent fighting on January 24th was so furious that several companies, including Company B, were decimated. With the exception of Lieutenant Murphy, all of Company B's officers were killed. 102 of the company's 120 enlisted men were either killed or wounded before they even reached their assigned position in the woods. By midnight on January 25th, Company B had penetrated 600 yards into the woods and established defensive positions north of Holtzwihr. Murphy now commanded the company. At 19 years old, he was responsible for the surviving 40 men of a unit that had begun the assault with 120 soldiers just 2 days earlier. Most of his men were wounded to varying degrees. All were exhausted, cold, hungry, and demoralized by the casualties they had suffered. Murphy positioned his company across the butt end of a large U-shaped clearing, with 2 fingers of forest extending toward Holtzwihr on either side. The heavily fortified village was clearly visible across rolling, snow-covered fields approximately 1,000 yards away. Murphy knew that German armor would have to advance along the narrow dirt road that ran through his position if they wanted to push deeper into American-held territory. The road was the key terrain. Whoever controlled it controlled the approaches to the American rear areas. 2 tank destroyers from the 805th Tank Destroyer Battalion, commanded by a Sergeant Tardy, positioned themselves astride the road. These were M10 tank destroyers, lightly armoured vehicles mounting 3-inch guns and a 50 caliber machine gun on an open-topped turret. The M10s were not tanks. They had been designed for a specific doctrine that emphasized mobility over protection. Their thin armour could be penetrated by most German anti-tank weapons, but their 3-inch guns could destroy German tanks if they could achieve good firing positions and if their crews were skilled and lucky. Early in the afternoon of January 26th, Murphy used his field telephone to call back to 1st Battalion headquarters for last-minute instructions and to request the promised reinforcements from 2nd Battalion, 30th Regiment. The response crushed any hope of support. The 2nd Battalion had not yet arrived and would not be coming forward to reinforce Company B. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Murphy received orders that were unambiguous and offered no comfort. Hold your position. As Murphy absorbed these orders, understanding fully what they meant, he made his final dispositions. He positioned his men in the best defensive positions available in the frozen woods. He ensured they had ammunition and that weapons were functioning properly. He checked that his telephone line to battalion headquarters was secure. Then he took up his own position in a shallow trench at the edge of the woods, where he had clear observation of the road and the approaches from Holtzwihr. At 2 in the afternoon on January 26, 1945, German artillery began falling on the American positions. The barrage lasted approximately 30 minutes, seeking to soften up the defenders before the assault. Murphy and his men huddled in their shallow positions as shells burst among the trees, sending fragments and splinters screaming through the air. When the barrage lifted, Murphy looked across the snow-covered field toward Holtzwihr and saw what he had been expecting. 6 Tiger tanks emerged from the village, their engines rumbling with distinctive deep-throated power. Behind them came approximately 250 German infantrymen, dressed in white winter camouflage. The Germans moved in textbook assault formation, with the tanks leading and the infantry following in dispersed groups, ready to exploit any breakthrough the armour might achieve. Murphy watched them come. In the 2 years since landing in North Africa, he had fought Germans in every terrain and weather condition imaginable. He had survived situations that killed most of the men who had landed with him at Fadala. He had learned to read a battlefield, to understand what was coming before it arrived. And as he watched those 6 tanks advancing toward his position, Murphy understood with absolute certainty what was about to happen. The American tank destroyers opened fire first. Sergeant Tardy's M10S engaged the German tanks at maximum range, their 3-inch guns cracking with sharp reports. The high-velocity armor-piercing shells raced across the snow-covered field. Murphy watched the tracer rounds arc toward their targets. Then his heart sank as he saw the shells strike the German armor and bounce off harmlessly. The Tiger tank's frontal armor was too thick. The rounds that should have penetrated and destroyed the German vehicles were deflecting, unable to punch through the heavy steel. The Germans had not committed their most advanced tanks to this attack by accident. They knew the Americans in this sector were equipped with M10 tank destroyers, whose guns were marginally effective against Tiger armor at best. The German tanks continued their advance, firing their own 88mm cannons as they came. The first German round struck the rear M10 with devastating force. The tank destroyer, with its thin armor and open-topped turret, stood no chance. The 88mm shell penetrated the vehicle's armor and detonated inside, killing the commander and gunner instantly. The M10 erupted in flames. The surviving crew members scrambled out of the burning vehicle and retreated toward the woods where Murphy's infantry was positioned. Smoke boiled up from the stricken tank destroyer, black and oily, rising into the cold afternoon air. Inside the turret, 54 rounds of 3-inch ammunition remained, along with 300 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition stored beneath the vehicle. If the fire reached those munitions, the tank destroyer would explode with tremendous force. The second M10 continued engaging the German tanks for several more minutes, but with the same ineffective results. The German armor kept coming. Then German infantry, seeing one tank destroyer destroyed and sensing the Americans were wavering, increased their rate of advance. They moved more boldly now, closing the distance to the American positions. Murphy remained in his forward observation post, his telephone pressed against his ear, as he called fire missions to the battalion artillery. He provided precise coordinates. The American artillery responded, shells beginning to fall among the advancing Germans. High explosive rounds detonated across the snowy field, throwing up geysers of frozen earth and snow. German infantrymen went down, but others kept coming. The artillery was slowing them but not stopping them. Murphy fired his M1 carbine at the advancing Germans, emptying magazine after magazine. The carbine was not a powerful weapon, effective only at relatively close range, but Murphy was an expert shot. He aimed carefully, fired, saw Germans fall, and continued firing. His carbine's bolt locked back on an empty magazine. Murphy reached for another magazine and discovered he had none left. He had expended all his carbine ammunition. The German advance was now approximately 100 yards from his position. The second American tank destroyer, having achieved no success against the Tiger tanks and facing imminent destruction, withdrew toward the rear. Its crew had fought as long as they could, but staying meant certain death for no gain. Murphy was now alone at his forward observation post. Behind him, perhaps 50 yards distant, his company held their positions in the woods. Ahead of him, 6 Tiger tanks and 250 German infantrymen continued their assault. The first tank destroyer continued to burn, flames now engulfing the turret and beginning to spread to the engine compartment. Murphy could feel the heat from the fire even at his distance. The M10 was a death trap, burning intensely with the potential to explode at any moment. Murphy looked at the burning tank destroyer. He looked at the advancing Germans. He looked back toward the woods where his men waited. Then Audie Murphy made a decision that would define his life and secure his place in history. He left his relatively safe observation post and ran directly toward the burning tank destroyer. Several of his men later reported shouting at him, trying to warn him back, unable to believe what they were seeing. Murphy reached the M10, flames licking around its turret and black smoke pouring from its interior. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the vehicle. The turret was open-topped by design, allowing the crew to see better but providing minimal protection. Murphy positioned himself behind the 50 caliber M2 Browning heavy machine gun mounted on the rear of the turret. The weapon had not been damaged in the attack. It was still functional, still loaded, and from this elevated position, Murphy had a clear field of fire across the entire German assault force. He grasped the machine gun's spade grips and pressed down the butterfly trigger with his thumbs. The 50 caliber machine gun roared to life. The weapon fired at a rate of approximately 500 rounds per minute. Each round was larger than a man's thumb, traveling at nearly 3,000 feet per second. At the ranges Murphy was engaging, the 50 caliber could penetrate light armor, destroy equipment, and kill with devastating effectiveness. Murphy traversed the gun across the advancing German infantry, firing in controlled bursts. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the Germans. The 50 caliber rounds tore through the white-clad German infantrymen with terrible effect. Men fell in groups. Others dove for cover, seeking any depression in the snowy ground that might protect them from the murderous fire. Murphy adjusted his aim and fired again. A squad of German soldiers attempting to flank his position by crawling through a ditch to his right became his next target. He rotated the machine gun and fired directly into the ditch. Not one of those soldiers survived. The German tanks, seeing their infantry support shredded by Murphy's fire, began to fall back slightly. Tank commanders understood that armor without infantry support was vulnerable. Infantry could spot threats that tank crews could not see. Infantry could protect tanks from close assault, and Murphy had just destroyed or dispersed much of their infantry support. But the Germans did not retreat. They repositioned and prepared to try again. And now, every German soldier and tank commander on that battlefield knew exactly where the devastating fire was coming from. Murphy remained standing on the burning tank destroyer, completely exposed, firing the 50 caliber machine gun. German soldiers fired back with rifles and machine guns. Bullets cracked past Murphy's head, struck the tank destroyer around him, ricocheted off metal with distinctive whining sounds. The German tanks began firing their cannons and machine guns at Murphy's position. 88mm rounds screamed past, some missing by feet, others by inches. The noise was overwhelming. The roar of the 50 caliber, the crack of rifles, the stutter of machine guns, the thunder of tank cannons, the explosion of artillery shells. The smoke from the burning tank destroyer beneath Murphy's feet grew thicker. He could feel the heat intensifying. The fire was spreading, moving toward the ammunition storage. If the stored ammunition detonated, the explosion would vaporize Murphy instantly. Every moment he remained on that vehicle, the risk of catastrophic explosion increased. Murphy ignored the danger. He maintained his position on the field telephone, calling fire missions to battalion artillery, even as he fired the machine gun. This was a feat that witnesses found almost impossible to believe. Murphy would fire a burst from the 50 caliber, drop one hand to grab the telephone receiver, relay firing corrections to artillery, hang up the telephone, and resume firing the machine gun. The coordination required was extraordinary. The cool-headedness necessary to perform such actions while under intense fire was beyond the capacity of most soldiers. But Murphy had spent 2 years in continuous combat. He had been in so many firefights that fear, while still present, no longer paralyzed his ability to function. He had learned to channel adrenaline into focused action rather than panic. During one radio call, an artillery officer asked Murphy how close the Germans were to his position. Murphy's response became legendary. He reportedly said words to the effect of, "Hold the phone and I'll let you talk to one of them." The Germans were that close. Some approached to within 10 yards before Murphy's fire cut them down. The battle became a personal duel between Murphy and the entire German assault force. Wave after wave of German infantry attempted to close with the American positions, and wave after wave Murphy destroyed or drove back with precise machine gun fire. The German tanks fired everything they had at him: tank cannon rounds, machine gun fire, all directed at the lone figure standing on the burning tank destroyer. How Murphy survived is a question that witnesses pondered for the rest of their lives. Some attributed it to luck, others called it divine intervention. Murphy himself never offered an explanation. He simply did what needed to be done and survived. For 1 hour, Audie Murphy stood atop that burning M10 tank destroyer, firing the 50 caliber machine gun and directing artillery fire, while the Germans tried every method they could devise to kill him. Sergeant Elmer Brawley, observing from the woods behind Murphy's position, later provided a sworn statement describing what he witnessed. He watched Murphy kill German soldiers in the ditches, in the meadows, in the woods, wherever he could see them. The Germans reached as close as 10 yards from Lieutenant Murphy, only to be mowed down by his fire. The billowing smoke from the tank destroyer, combined with the constant roar of battle, prevented the Germans from detecting exactly where the machine gun fire was coming from. They knew Murphy was somewhere on or near the burning vehicle, but the smoke and chaos made it difficult to acquire a precise target. This confusion helped keep Murphy alive, but it could not protect him indefinitely. During the action, a German round struck Murphy. Shrapnel tore into his right leg, causing a wound that should have forced him to abandon his position. Murphy felt the impact, felt the hot pain of the wound, looked down briefly to assess the damage, and continued fighting. He simply refused to acknowledge the wound. He did not call for medical assistance. He did not retreat to safety. The mission was to hold this position, and Murphy intended to hold it for as long as he remained conscious. The German attack began to falter. The tanks, having lost much of their infantry, a support to Murphy's fire and American artillery, could not advance without exposing themselves to close assault. The infantry, having suffered devastating casualties from the .50 caliber and artillery, lost their momentum. The assault that had begun with such confidence and overwhelming numerical superiority was disintegrating. German commanders made the decision to withdraw and regroup. The tanks began pulling back toward Holzwihr. The infantry retreated, leaving their dead and wounded scattered across the snow-covered field. Murphy continued firing until the last Germans disappeared from view. Only then, when the immediate threat had passed, did Murphy face a new crisis. The tank destroyer beneath his feet was now fully engulfed in flames. The heat had become unbearable. The stored ammunition could detonate at any instant. Murphy's .50 caliber machine gun ran dry. He had exhausted the 300 rounds of ammunition stored on the vehicle. With no more ammunition and the fire reaching critical intensity, Murphy finally abandoned the tank destroyer. He jumped down from the burning vehicle and began walking back toward his company's positions in the woods. The German wound in his leg made movement difficult and painful. He limped through the snow, dazed from the hour-long ordeal, his ears ringing from the noise, smoke blackening his face and uniform. His men watched him approach with something close to awe. They had witnessed the impossible. One man, armed only with a machine gun and a telephone, had stopped an assault by 6 tanks and 250 infantry. As Murphy reached the American lines, his first actions were not to seek medical treatment for his wound. Instead, he immediately began organizing his company for a counterattack. He moved among his men, giving orders, positioning them for an assault. Some of his soldiers tried to convince him to accept medical treatment. Murphy refused. The Germans had been stopped, but not defeated. They would regroup and attack again if given the opportunity. The only way to secure the position was to drive them back decisively. With Murphy leading from the front despite his wound, Company B emerged from the woods and advanced across the field that minutes before had been a killing zone. The American soldiers moved past the bodies of German soldiers that Murphy had killed. They advanced past the still-burning tank destroyer. They pushed toward Holzwihr with Murphy directing their movement. The Germans, shocked by the sudden counterattack and having just suffered severe casualties, withdrew further. The American counterattack succeeded in forcing the Germans completely out of the immediate area. The critical road was secure. The woods that represented the German objective remained in American hands. Company B had held its position. Only after the counterattack succeeded did Murphy finally allow the company medic to examine his leg wound. The shrapnel had torn through muscle and tissue, causing significant damage and blood loss. Murphy needed proper medical treatment at a rear area hospital. Again, Murphy refused evacuation. He remained with his company, insisting his wound could be treated in the field. He would not leave his men. The Battle of Holzwihr cost the Germans dearly. Murphy personally killed or wounded approximately 50 German soldiers during his hour on the burning tank destroyer. American artillery, directed by Murphy's fire missions, killed or wounded many more. The 6 Tiger tanks, unable to achieve their objective without infantry support, withdrew from the battle having accomplished nothing. The assault that was supposed to break through American lines and threaten the entire 3rd Division's position had been stopped by one lieutenant and his decimated company. In the days following the battle, witnesses provided sworn statements describing what they had seen. The statements were necessary because what Murphy had done seemed impossible. Without corroboration from multiple sources, no one would believe it. Brigadier General Ralph Lovett and Lieutenant Colonel Hallett Edson reviewed the statements and recommended Murphy for the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration for valor in the United States. The recommendation was approved through channels. On June 2, 1945, at a ceremony near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commander of the 7th Army, presented Murphy with the Medal of Honor. The citation read in part that Murphy had ordered his men to withdraw to prepared positions in a woods while he remained forward at his command post, that he had climbed on a burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its .50 caliber machine gun against the enemy, that for an hour the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position, that he received a leg wound but ignored it and continued the single-handed fight until his ammunition was exhausted, that he then made his way to his company, refused medical attention, and organized the company in a counterattack which forced the Germans to withdraw, that his directing of artillery fire wiped out many of the enemy and he killed or wounded about 50, that Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction, and enabled it to hold the woods which had been the enemy's objective. The Medal of Honor made Murphy a national celebrity. Life magazine featured him on its cover on July 16, 1945, introducing him to millions of Americans as the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. The photograph showed a baby-faced young man who looked far younger than his 19 years, wearing a uniform, displaying an extraordinary array of ribbons and medals. Americans struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the wars. Violence found in Murphy a symbol of courage and sacrifice. Here was living proof that ordinary Americans, even those from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, could rise to extraordinary heights when their country needed them. But for Murphy, the Medal of Honor and the celebrity that accompanied it came with a heavy price. The war ended in Europe on May 8, 1945. Murphy had survived. Against all odds, against all probability, he had lived through 2.5 years of continuous combat. But survival brought its own burdens. Murphy had seen things no human being should see. He had done things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had watched countless friends die. He had killed hundreds of enemy soldiers, many at close range where he could see their faces. The psychological wounds were deep and would never fully heal. In June 1945, Murphy returned to the United States. He was greeted with parades, banquets, and celebrations. Texas honored its native son. The military lauded his achievements. The public embraced him as a hero. But Murphy felt disconnected from the celebrations. He had not fought for glory or recognition. He had fought to keep his friends alive, to complete his missions, to survive another day. The medals and accolades felt hollow compared to the cost at which they had been earned. Actor James Cagney saw Murphy's photograph on the cover of Life magazine and invited him to Hollywood to pursue an acting career. Murphy had no training as an actor and no particular interest in films, but he accepted the invitation. Hollywood offered a future beyond the poverty of rural Texas and the trauma of combat. Murphy moved to California in 1945 and began the difficult process of transitioning from soldier to civilian. The transition was not easy. Murphy struggled with what was then called battle fatigue or shell shock and is now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. He suffered recurring nightmares about combat. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He was hypervigilant, unable to relax, constantly scanning for threats that no longer existed. He had difficulty trusting people. He experienced survivor's guilt, tormented by the knowledge that so many of his friends had died while he had lived. Murphy dealt with his psychological trauma in the only way he knew how. He pushed it down, refused to acknowledge it openly, and tried to build a new life despite it. In 1949, Murphy published his autobiography, To Hell and Back. The book was a bestseller, providing an unflinching account of his combat experiences. Writing the book was therapeutic for Murphy, allowing him to process some of what he had endured, but it also forced him to relive traumatic memories in detail. In 1955, after considerable inner debate, Murphy agreed to portray himself in the film adaptation of To Hell and Back. The movie became Universal Studios' highest-grossing film until Jaws in 1975. Murphy's portrayal of himself was restrained and understated, deliberately downplaying the heroics to avoid glorifying war. Murphy went on to appear in 44 films over a 21-year career. Most were westerns, a genre well suited to his quiet intensity and natural screen presence. He was never a great actor in the technical sense, but he had an authenticity that resonated with audiences. People watching Murphy on screen were seeing a genuine war hero, and that knowledge added weight to his performances. Despite his success in Hollywood, Murphy continued to struggle with PTSD throughout his life. He became addicted to sleeping pills, using them to fight the insomnia that plagued him. He experienced mood swings and occasional violent outbursts. His first marriage to actress Wanda Hendricks ended in divorce in 1951. He married Pamela Archer that same year, and they had 2 sons together. But even in his second marriage, psychological scars of war created challenges. In his later years, Murphy did something remarkable and unusual for his era. He began speaking publicly about his psychological struggles. At a time when mental health issues, particularly those related to combat, were considered shameful and weak, Murphy spoke candidly about his PTSD. He called on the government to provide better mental health care for veterans. He testified before Congress about the needs of returning soldiers. His willingness to discuss his own struggles helped reduce the stigma surrounding combat-related psychological trauma and paved the way for better treatment of veterans in subsequent decades. Murphy also used his fame and influence to help individual veterans. He worked with veterans organizations, helped disabled veterans navigate the bureaucracy of the Veterans Administration, and advocated tirelessly for those who had served. In his final years, Murphy faced financial difficulties. He had lost significant money through gambling and poor investments. By 1971, he was essentially broke, but he refused offers to appear in alcohol and cigarette commercials, not wanting to set a bad example for young people who looked up to him. On May 28, 1971, Murphy was a passenger on a small private plane flying from Atlanta, Georgia, to Martinsville, Virginia, for a business meeting. The pilot, who lacked an instrument rating, attempted to fly through deteriorating weather conditions. At approximately 12 minutes past noon, the Aero Commander 680 aircraft crashed into Brush Mountain near Roanoke, Virginia. Murphy and all 5 other people aboard were killed instantly. He was 45 years old. The news of Murphy's death shocked the nation. Tributes poured in from across the country. On June 7, 1971, Murphy was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. In attendance were senior military officers, government officials, and hundreds of veterans who came to pay their respects. George H. W. Bush, then U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, attended the funeral. Army Chief of Staff William Westmoreland delivered remarks. Members of the 3rd Infantry Division served as honor guard. Murphy had requested that his headstone be simple and plain, like that of any other soldier. His wish was honored. His grave in Section 46 is marked by a standard white marble headstone, identical to those marking the graves of thousands of other American service members. Murphy's grave has become one of the most visited at Arlington National Cemetery, second only to that of President John F. Kennedy. The legacy of Audie Murphy extends far beyond his military decorations and his film career. He represents something fundamental about the American experience and about the nature of courage itself. Murphy's story demonstrates that heroism is not the exclusive province of the physically imposing or the socially privileged. The undersized son of sharecroppers, rejected by multiple military services as too small and too young, became the most decorated American combat soldier of the most devastating war in history. His background of poverty and hardship, which might have been considered disadvantages, actually prepared him for the challenges of combat in ways that more comfortable upbringings could not. The skills he learned hunting to feed his family translated directly to combat marksmanship. The responsibility he shouldered, caring for his siblings, prepared him for the weight of command. The resilience he developed surviving the Great Depression gave him the mental toughness to endure prolonged combat stress. Murphy's action at Holtzwihr on January 26, 1945, has been studied by military historians and tacticians as an example of courage under fire and sound tactical decision-making under pressure. The choice to climb onto the burning tank destroyer appeared suicidal to observers, but Murphy understood the tactical geometry of the situation. From ground level, he had limited ability to engage the German assault effectively. From the elevated position on the tank destroyer, he had clear fields of fire and excellent observation. The risk of the vehicle exploding was real, but the certainty of his company being overrun if he did not act was even more real. Murphy made a calculated decision, accepting enormous personal risk to accomplish the mission of holding the position. His ability to fight effectively while wounded demonstrates extraordinary pain tolerance and mental discipline. Most soldiers receiving a significant leg wound would be unable to continue fighting effectively. Murphy not only continued fighting, he remained standing on the tank destroyer, operating a heavy machine gun that required physical strength to control, and maintained his tactical awareness sufficiently to direct artillery fire simultaneously. The hour Murphy spent on that burning tank destroyer represented the culmination of everything he had learned and become during 2.5 years of continuous combat. The marksmanship he had developed as a child hunting game to feed his family, the tactical awareness he had gained through dozens of firefights, the leadership skills he had cultivated commanding men in desperate situations, the mental toughness forged by poverty, loss, and sustained combat stress. All of these elements came together in that frozen field in France. Murphy's action also illustrates a truth about military leadership that cannot be taught in any school. Leaders who are willing to accept the same risks they ask of their men, who lead from the front rather than the rear, who demonstrate by personal example that the mission can be accomplished, inspire extraordinary performance from their soldiers. Murphy's company had suffered devastating casualties in the previous 2 days. The men were exhausted, cold, demoralized, and facing overwhelming enemy force. Yet when Murphy climbed onto that burning tank destroyer and began fighting, he demonstrated that the position could be held. His courage gave his men courage, his refusal to yield gave them permission to stand firm, and when he led them in the counterattack despite his wound, they followed without hesitation because he had earned their absolute trust. The mathematics of Murphy's achievement are stark and undeniable. One man, armed with a machine gun and a telephone, stopped an assault by 6 tanks and 250 infantry. He personally killed or wounded 50 enemy soldiers while directing artillery fire that killed or wounded many more. He held his position for 1 hour, under continuous enemy fire, while standing on a vehicle that could explode at any moment. He was wounded, but refused to acknowledge the wound. When the enemy withdrew, he immediately organized and led a counterattack that drove them from the field. These are the facts, documented by multiple eyewitnesses and confirmed through official investigation. They sound like fiction, like the exaggerated heroics of a propaganda film, but they happened exactly as described. In the decades since World War II, Murphy's story has inspired countless Americans. Military academies teach his action as an example of leadership and tactical thinking under pressure. Veterans organizations honor his memory and his advocacy for fellow veterans. His grave at Arlington National Cemetery remains a pilgrimage site for those who wish to pay respects to genuine heroism. But perhaps the most important aspect of Murphy's legacy is what his life demonstrates about the cost of war and the debt society owes to those who fight. Murphy did not return from war unscathed. The physical wounds healed, but the psychological wounds never did. He struggled with PTSD for the rest of his life. He self-medicated with sleeping pills. He experienced nightmares and flashbacks. He carried guilt about the men he had killed and the friends who had died. These were not weaknesses or character flaws. They were the natural and inevitable consequences of what Murphy had experienced and done. No human being can kill hundreds of other human beings, watch friends die violently, live under constant threat of death for 2.5 years, and emerge psychologically unaffected. The trauma is real, the wounds are real, and they deserve recognition and treatment. Murphy's willingness to speak publicly about his struggles, to testify before Congress about the needs of veterans, to advocate for better mental health care, represented courage of a different sort than what he displayed at Holtzwihr. It took bravery to stand on that burning tank destroyer. It also took bravery to admit publicly that the war had damaged him psychologically, to ask for help, to speak on behalf of veterans who could not speak for themselves. As a result of Murphy's advocacy, and that of others like him, Congress passed legislation improving veterans' mental health care. The Audie Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio was dedicated in 1973, 2 years after his death. It stands as a permanent reminder that society's obligation to veterans extends beyond parades and monuments, to include addressing the invisible wounds of war. Murphy's widow, Pamela Murphy, honored her husband's memory by working for 35 years as a patient liaison at the Veterans Administration Hospital in Los Angeles. She spent more than 3 decades helping veterans navigate the complex VA system, advocating for their needs, ensuring they received the care and benefits they had earned. Her service represented a continuation of Murphy's own advocacy work and demonstrated that honoring veterans is not a one-time gesture, but an ongoing commitment. The story of Audie Murphy is ultimately a story about the complexity of heroism. He was undoubtedly a hero. His actions at Holtzwihr saved American lives and contributed to Allied victory. His medals were earned through genuine courage and sacrifice, but he was also a deeply flawed human being who struggled with trauma, made mistakes in his personal life, and faced challenges he could not overcome alone. These two realities are not contradictory, they are complementary. Murphy was heroic because he was human, not despite being human. His courage was real precisely because he felt fear. His sacrifice was meaningful precisely because he suffered for it. His legacy endures precisely because his story is honest about both the glory and the cost of war. When we remember Audie Murphy, we should remember the entire story. The poor boy from Texas who learned to shoot to feed his family. The rejected recruit who persisted until someone would accept him. The combat soldier who earned every major decoration for valor through 2.5 years of fighting. The lieutenant who stood on a burning tank destroyer for an hour and stopped a German assault. The veteran who struggled with PTSD and addiction, but used his celebrity to help others. The advocate who spoke truth about the psychological cost of combat when such honesty was rare. The husband and father who tried to build a normal life despite carrying unbearable memories. All of these are Audie Murphy, and all are part of his legacy. On that frozen field north of Holtzwihr on January 26, 1945, Second Lieutenant Audie Leon Murphy demonstrated that one person, in the right place at the right time, and with the courage to act despite impossible odds, can change the outcome of a battle. He proved that physical size has nothing to do with the size of one's courage. He showed that leadership means accepting the same risks you ask of others. He illustrated that ordinary people, given extraordinary circumstances, are capable of extraordinary actions. The German assault that day was supposed to break through American lines, destroy Company B, and threaten the entire port. 3rd Division's position. It failed because one 19-year-old from Hunt County, Texas, decided that it would fail. Murphy climbed onto that burning tank destroyer knowing he would probably die. He stayed there for an hour, knowing that every second could be his last. He led the counterattack, knowing his wounded leg should have prevented him from walking, let alone fighting. Why did he do it? When asked after the war why he had seized the machine gun and taken on an entire German company, Murphy gave a simple answer that revealed everything about his character. They were killing my friends, that was the reason. Not glory, not medals, not patriotic abstractions. His friends were in danger, and he had the ability to protect them, so he did. The calculus was that simple and that profound. The .50 caliber machine gun that Murphy used that day fired approximately 5,000 rounds from the ammunition stored on the M10. Each burst found its target. Each burst stopped German soldiers who were trying to kill Murphy's friends. For 1 hour, Audie Murphy was the only thing standing between the German assault and the destruction of his company. He stood alone because no one else could. He fought with everything he had because anything less meant failure. He endured because giving up meant his friends would die. This is the essence of courage. Not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Not superhuman ability, but human determination pushed to its limits. Not invulnerability, but the willingness to accept vulnerability for a greater purpose. Audie Murphy was 5 feet 5.5 inches tall and weighed barely more than 112 pounds when he enlisted. The Marines, the Paratroopers, and the Navy all rejected him as too small. Yet this undersized kid from the poorest part of Texas became the most decorated American combat soldier of the 20th century. His story demolishes every assumption about what makes a warrior: size, education, social status. None of these determine courage. What determines courage is character forged through adversity, skills developed through necessity, and the willingness to act when action is required. The lessons of Murphy's life extend far beyond the military sphere. His story teaches that our origins do not determine our destinations, that disadvantages can become advantages if we learn the right lessons from hardship. That true leadership means serving those we lead rather than using them to serve ourselves. That speaking honestly about our struggles helps others more than projecting false strength. That sacrifice has meaning only when we remember why we make it. In modern America, where much of the population has no direct connection to military service, it becomes easy to romanticize or minimize what veterans have experienced. Murphy's story provides necessary corrective to both tendencies. War is neither glorious adventure nor meaningless violence. It is terrible necessity that extracts a real cost from real people. Veterans are neither superheroes immune to psychological harm, nor victims broken beyond repair. They are people who have done difficult and sometimes terrible things in service to their country, and they deserve honest acknowledgement of both their service and their struggles. The memorial at Holtzwihr, where Murphy earned the Medal of Honor, has become a place of pilgrimage. Each year, people visit to stand where Murphy stood, to look across the field where he fought, to remember what happened there on January 26, 1945. The monument describes Murphy's actions simply and factually, letting the documented events speak for themselves. No embellishment is necessary. The truth is remarkable enough. Murphy's grave at Arlington National Cemetery is marked by a simple white headstone, as he requested. The marker is identical to those of thousands of other service members buried there. Murphy did not want special recognition in death. He wanted to be remembered as a soldier among soldiers. But the constant flow of visitors to his grave, the flowers and flags left there, the veterans who stand silently paying respects, demonstrate that his wish for simplicity coexists with the reality of his extraordinary legacy. The children and grandchildren of the men Murphy saved at Holtzwihr owe their existence to his actions that day. This is not hyperbole or exaggeration. If Murphy had not stopped the German assault, Company B would have been destroyed. 40 men would likely have been killed or captured. Those men would not have returned home to marry, to have children, to build lives. The ripple effects of Murphy's courage extend through generations. Every descendant of those 40 men exists because Murphy climbed onto that burning tank destroyer. This is the ultimate measure of heroism, not the medals earned or the fame achieved, but the lives saved and the futures made possible. In 1955, when Murphy portrayed himself in To Hell and Back, he deliberately downplayed his own heroics. The film shows him as competent and brave, but not superhuman. Murphy insisted on this portrayal because he understood something important. Heroism that appears impossible to duplicate inspires admiration, but not emulation. Heroism that appears achievable by ordinary people inspires others to act courageously in their own circumstances. Murphy wanted people to understand that he was not special in the sense of possessing abilities others lacked. He was simply an ordinary person who found himself in extraordinary circumstances and chose to do what needed to be done. That choice, that willingness to act despite fear and despite cost, is available to everyone. We may never face the specific challenge Murphy faced at Holtzwihr. Most of us will never stand on a burning tank destroyer facing enemy assault. But all of us face moments when we must choose between safety and sacrifice, between self-interest and service to others, between doing what is easy and doing what is right. In those moments, Murphy's example provides guidance. Act despite fear, accept risk for worthy purpose, protect those who depend on you, maintain integrity under pressure. These principles apply whether the challenge is combat or any other form of adversity. The title of this story posed a question about how a truck driver held off 300 Germans. The title, like many video titles, uses engaging language and round numbers to attract viewers. The historical reality is even more remarkable than the title suggests. Murphy was not primarily a truck driver. He was an infantry officer, a role he earned through demonstrated combat excellence. The enemy force numbered approximately 250 infantry plus 6 tanks, making the threat even more severe than the title indicates. And Murphy did not simply hold them off, he stopped them completely, inflicted devastating casualties, and then led a counterattack that drove them from the field. The accurate version of events is more impressive than any exaggerated headline could be. This is characteristic of Murphy's entire story. The documented facts of his life and military service are so extraordinary that no embellishment is necessary or desirable. He earned 33 military decorations, including the Medal of Honor, making him the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. He killed approximately 240 enemy soldiers in combat and was wounded 3 times. He fought in 9 major campaigns across 3 years. He earned a battlefield commission from enlisted rank. He became a successful actor despite no formal training. He advocated for veterans despite the stigma surrounding mental health issues. These facts, verified and documented, tell a story of remarkable achievement and equally remarkable struggle. Audie Murphy died on May 28, 1971, at the age of 45. Combat or from his combat wounds. He died in a plane crash, a random accident that robbed the nation of one of its greatest heroes decades before his time. The tragedy of his death is compounded by the knowledge of everything he might have accomplished had he lived longer. But in the 45 years Murphy lived, he accomplished more than most people could in twice that time. He survived a childhood that would have defeated many adults. He excelled in combat under conditions that broke many soldiers. He built a successful civilian career despite psychological wounds that plagued him constantly. He used his celebrity to help others rather than simply enriching himself. He spoke truth about uncomfortable subjects when silence would have been easier. He remained, despite everything, fundamentally decent. This decency, perhaps more than his combat heroics, defines Murphy's character. He could have exploited his fame for personal gain without regard for others. He could have accepted lucrative endorsement deals for products he did not believe in. He could have remained silent about his struggles and allowed other veterans to suffer alone. He did none of these things. He maintained his integrity even when doing so cost him materially. The question posed by Murphy's life is not how he became a hero. The answer to that is documented in sworn statements and official citations. The deeper question is why he remained a decent person despite everything he experienced and everything he suffered. War can brutalize, can turn people cruel and indifferent to the suffering of others. Murphy fought for 2.5 years in some of the war's most savage combat. He killed hundreds of men. He watched friends die terrible deaths. He experienced trauma that would have justified bitterness and anger. Yet he emerged from the war, still capable of compassion, still concerned about the welfare of others, still committed to using his position to help rather than exploit. This represents a form of courage different from but equal to his combat bravery. The courage to remain human in the face of dehumanizing experience. The courage to care despite having every reason to become hardened. The courage to hope despite having seen the worst of human nature. When we tell Murphy's story, we honor not just his military achievements but his fundamental humanity. We remember that heroism and vulnerability coexist, that strength and struggle are not opposites but companions, that the same person who stands on a burning tank destroyer for an hour can also suffer nightmares and need help. Murphy's complete story, including his post-war struggles, makes his heroism more meaningful rather than less. He did not perform one extraordinary act and then retire to comfort. He fought a battle every day for the rest of his life, a battle against trauma and memory that he could never fully win but never stopped fighting. On January 26, 1945, in a frozen field in France, Audie Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and fought for an hour against overwhelming odds. He saved his company. He stopped an enemy assault. He earned the Medal of Honor. But perhaps his greatest legacy is not that 1 hour of combat, remarkable as it was. Perhaps his greatest legacy is everything that came after, the honest acknowledgement of his struggles, the advocacy for fellow veterans, the refusal to pretend that war does not cost those who fight it, the demonstration that heroes are human and that humanity makes heroism more, not less, admirable. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.